Hey guys, welcome to Sessions in Thought, where thinking should be like breathing, but some people just go through life honestly on autopilot, but not here. This is where we're going to be breaking it all down, perspectives, real talks, and the kind of conversations that are going to make you think twice. And at the center of it all is the man with all the questions, the thoughts, and all of the deep dives. It's Izzy B. Real, so let's get into it.
All right, guys, greatly appreciate it. This is going to be another episode. I greatly appreciate you guys tuning in. Not sure what episode this is though, but today this episode is going to be about basically about the weight of words, and do we really understand what we're saying when we're saying them. I'm gonna try to keep this one kind of short today, but I talked to a lot of people about the concept of understanding what words actually mean when they say them, and also just paying attention and recognizing how and if someone else actually understands the words that they're using in conversation, right? So there's a phrase that I kind of have always understood and accepted it to be truthful, and is that a lot of times people kind of use words to kind of hide things, right? But this phrase that I want to kind of finish that thought with the phrasing is that never mistake intelligence for elegance, right? And I kind of see the same way as that the ideology is kind of around the same thing, is that people use all of these big words to say a lot, right? But they're really not saying much. You said a lot to say nothing, right? And the most important part about communication is really making sure that the communicator is making sure that the listener understands exactly what they're trying to say to them. A lot of times when you talk to people, it kind of sometimes, and just to put it in a different type of perspective, you can tell the difference when someone's talking at you and then the difference between them talking to you, right? And so as a communicator, the person that's stating whatever they're going to state, they need to make sure that you're going to understand it, right? And I'll say this as an example. It's like I could be a geologist, a rocket scientist, right? But and by all definitions, for most people, they would consider those people to be smart people or such, right? But if they can't stand in front of a room and can't explain it to a child, the question that I would ask anyone else to kind of consider is then, can you really command, or are you really that much of a master of your craft? Because you should be able to make something that's very complex, very simple for anyone to understand. And I say this on when it comes to understanding what words mean in a lot of different areas, right? A lot of times people will say like, well, they just don't understand what I'm trying to say, or because I speak it in a different way. Well, it's your job to make sure that these people understand. And I'll say like particularly you hear this come up in a conversation, is that, oh, it's just that I talk different or I speak very proper, and so these people that I'm talking to just can't seem to understand it. And it's like, and say like specifically when we talk about Black and brown communities, it's like, yeah, you may be able to command the English language at a high level, which is great, right? However, the very same people that you come from are looking at you and expecting you to be able to communicate with them, to be able to speak to them and make sure that that they can understand you, because there's a connection just off the way that you look, that they assume that to you, right? So if you stand in front of them and you're talking at them, that is almost insulting. It's just as bad as like my grandmother used to say, like, be careful not to whisper around people, right? And it's the same concept if you're like me or anyone else that speak another language. Is rude when you're in another room, in a room full of people that don't speak that language, right? Because they don't understand. And it makes it even tougher because, like, when someone doesn't understand you, most of the time it's going to be interpreted as disrespect, right? And it's just that flat out, that to be simple. So you have to be careful with those words, meaning how they're going to impact it. And I'm pretty sure, like, even on the receiving end, you have to understand that, right? So typically for me, like, if I'm the person and I'm hearing somebody speak to me, I try not to take it as a personal assault on myself, right? I try to remove my feelings from it and just be like, and try to hear what they're trying to say. And if I don't understand something, I'm going to ask questions, right? But I've realized that too can cause problems as well. Is that when you're not understanding what they're trying to say to you, and you're like, hey, what do you mean by that? Or what are you trying to say? Or this is what I'm trying to, or this is what I thought you said, right? There can be some issues. We all probably have experienced that even in relationships. Like, say for me, being in a relationship with a woman, and she says something to me, and I'm a guy, so I'm a linear thinker. So I'm thinking step by step by step. But you took it in all of this more of a spider web thinking kind of mentality. But I'm just trying to get to point A to point B the quickest way possible. And so as these examples of you talking to me, I don't understand, because you told me, you said this, then do this, and then this, and this. So I did that. But then it's all these other different contexts that you didn't give, and you expected someone to be able to follow that. Now, some of that could be on me necessarily in the scenario, right? Where I could take ownership of some of this and try to think outside the box and square. But if you're asking something of me and it's something that you would normally do for yourself, you have to give that person the instructions to make sure that they're able to complete it, right? Now, granted, I have the ability and I need to have discernment to be able to like kind of bend and make my own decisions if something doesn't go exactly the way it was planned. But if you need me to do something for you, you have to tell me what you need and allow me to do that in that particular way. Because if you leave out information, I'm only going to act off and accordingly of what you told me, right? So it's a difference. It's a difference there. And we can see it in a lot of different ways in a lot of different areas, right? In your life. And it's not just about, when it comes to those types of situations, right? It could be even in the workplace. People will tell you certain things and give you a task, or even if you're the supervisor and you give someone else a task, and you have to make sure that you recap everything that you said just to make sure. And sometimes for me, even me personally, like I have an amazing memory, but I also make sure that I go back and say, okay, out of all the information that you gave me, this is what I understood to be the case. Is that correct? Right? And there's a couple examples just thinking about like what words mean, like when it comes down to it, is that like, let's say for example, like the context of like the word woke, the way people are using it now, like people don't understand that I'm gonna say the vast majority of people, right, particularly white people specifically, but even like black people to a certain extent don't understand how far back like the word the phrase self-care goes back. And it was actually first expressed by a black woman. I'm not gonna give you all the facts, you can go look this up yourself. That's what this show is about. Think it should be like breathing. So once you hear something, you should be able to be like, okay, let me go question that, let me go do some research on that. But the phrase self-care was actually started by a black woman that was going through the Black Empowerment movement of the 70s, just to make sure that she took care of herself. She was actually a therapist, if I'm not mistaken. That part you can't necessarily quote me on, but that's for sure. But also like the woke goes back to that same time period. So for many of the people in the community, particularly, let's say that there's always been connection between black and brown people specifically, right? When you talk about like the Black Panthers and you had the Young Lords, those type of things. So those paths always like really cross in a lot of different areas. And it's ironic because in the way of the world, sometimes we, like we forget that we actually are more connected than we actually are, but that's a conversation for another day. But like that phrase of that, what woke really means is that it was, what it actually means is that it was an awakening, right? That's where you come from, that the ideology of being, I'm black and I'm proud, black is beautiful. It's that awakening and being like, okay, I'm knowledgeable. I understand what's going on in my environment. I can see it. I understand it. And I'm also willing to help the next person and look after them, because I am now awoken. I wasn't walking in this dark place where I also feel like I couldn't do anything to take care of myself or my family. But now that I'm awake, I see how the game is being played. I see how there's systematic, what you would consider systematic racism. No, I don't want to say what you consider, because that's actually a real thing. You can go look that up when you talk about redlining and all of those types of things. And even like how certain things are in place as well now. And I would say, good example, if you don't understand what that is, go take a movie at the West Side, Go watch the movie West Side Story. That was actually kind of based on real times and real situations here in New York. Like, New York changed a lot, and even with like, you know, say like Mayor Koch and all of those. Was it Mayor Koch? Was Koch a mayor? That I gotta double check. But you talk about Koch, like, and all the people that actually started, you know, building the freeways through the Bronx, basically wiping out whole communities on, you know, to try to build the freeways and all of those types of things. But, you know, those things go back. But then you talk about, like, so those things, even like when it comes to self-care, like, you know, it's about taking care of yourself and all these different things. But like, people would try to weaponize that. Like, or we could talk about words or phrasing like gaslighting. Like, there's a difference, right? And there's also, like, you know, like, there's a real big difference when it comes to these words. Like, people don't understand that they're literally, like, a colloquialism is something different than the actual definition. And the whole point of all of this is that when we talk about words, the reason why they have definitions and the reason why we have these words is that these words and those definition of these words are our communal agreement when we commune with each other, right? When we converse with one another. Because we look at this word and when we say, I know what this means, you know what this means. And then when we speak them, you understand me and I understand you. Hence why this conversation takes place, is that why a lot of coaches struggle with, one, to give you like context, is that English is the second hardest language to learn. So the people that run around here talking about like, oh, there's so many people that struggle to learn English because it's the second hardest language to learn, and we'll get to that part. And then the first hardest language to learn is Japanese, and that's kind of, you know, obvious, like if you know anything about like linguistic studies or anything. But you talk about English. A lot of coaches have a distrust for people that speak English, and we're not just talking about Americans, but also like British, of course, is their language, English, right? So like, there's a nuance that comes with the English language. You can literally say one thing but mean another, or the way you inflect the voice can change the way that means. So a lot of languages across the world is a very direct kind of language. So like, a lot of times, if you are a traveler and had the ability to travel, or met people from different cultures, you wonder why they're kind of more straightforward in the things that they say and how they feel. It's because typically the way that they've learned, the way they've been learned to speak is to be straightforward, because the language itself predicates itself. It's only one way to say this, right? Excuse me, I'm a little under the weather, but it's just the context of this, right? And I always say context really matters, and it's super important to understand why context matters when you have conversations, because you have to add that nuance that comes to these conversations that you're having with someone else, you know, and also give people the opportunity to be able to add that context to it as well. And that's a big thing that we're going to talk about with this podcast, is making sure that you give yourself and the person the respect to be able to understand what they're trying to say, right? Don't have to agree with them, but at least try to understand where they're coming, like what they're trying to say. It may not make any sense to you and the way your foundations are, but it allows you to do that. But you try to give yourself that space to be like, if I came from where they came from, if I walked the journey that they walk, would I come to that same conclusion? And a lot of times you can be like, realistically, you could say yeah. Like, if you were able to put on their shoes, you would be like, yeah, I probably would end up in that same place based on the environment and situation that they went through to get there. And other times you just like, I just don't get it. But but you had a conversation and be like, I heard what you had to say, like, so it's one of those things. But back to it. But when we talk about it, that's why like a lot of coaches actually struggle with dealing with people who have that kind of natural kind of distrust towards it, right? It's just that because the language is so nuanced, you can influx it this way. It's just the even way you want to talk about just the language itself, but then you talk about the colloquialism. So even as let's take the United States as a whole, like what something means in the North, like say like the Northeast. And then you got like, let's say it's technically what they classify as the Mid-Atlantic, so that's like that Virginia, North Carolina area. Then you got what's the South, in the Deep South. So you're talking about like South Carolina, Georgia, and that these colloquialisms and that those languages and the different type of accents that we have on it. So we also talk about like say something like in certain parts of South Carolina or like off the coast with like Gullah Gullah, like the Gullah Gullah Island, those types of things. And you talk about the dialects of that comes from being in Texas or in the way we talk about that. So even our street slangs on top of that are so very different. So you have to be able to be like to give some. You don't have to, but it should be a level of etiquette that should put there is like, yo, I don't understand that. What do you mean by that? Right? And be able to explain what you're actually saying because we come from totally different from different places. And I also say that when we're talking about this, the context of like words and all of that and what they actually mean and how they're weighted and all that, is that once you look into early childhood development, like we understand that words, like the way that we like read, the way that we speak, all of these different things in relation to words is really predicated on social economic standards. And so like what you realize is that someone that comes from an upper middle class versus someone that's poor, they've heard an estimated 100,000 words more than like that upper class child has heard 100,000 more words than that lower class child, right? By the time they get to roughly about kindergarten, first grade area. And so the projection throughout the rest of their lifetime, let's say until they, I want to say the rest of their lifetime, but until like say they're school age, right? Until they graduate high school, 17, 18 years old, like there's almost no possible way for that child to actually catch up. And so then like let's also add into the mix to say if you come from a family that speaks multiple languages, right? But then on top of that, there's a say if your family, say your mom, dad, or your doesn't really speak English very well, and you're the person that's responsible. So the question is now when you're talking to a child, how do you expect that child to know and command the language the same way that this person comes from in this other place, right? And it's a very difficult thing. That's why you see like those social programs like ESL classes and those things that try to help make sure that kids that come from like those kind of like backgrounds, particularly like say Spanish, making sure that they can get the attention they need when it comes to the language, to make sure that as they go out through their life, they can man the language a little bit easier because they're not necessarily using it at home. I do believe even when it comes to words, I really do think that we need to really put in the United States, we need to put a lot more emphasis on speaking more languages. The world is a very large place and we run across a lot of people, and the fact that the United States is a melting pot is a bigger thing because we, you could talk about going to like places like, for me, I lived for a long time in New Orleans, or New Orleans, right? And so you're talking about there's like signs with French and it's this a different language like of Creole and all of these different kind of influences there, right, with French and Spanish that's going on there, and you see it all across the United States. So you can see like there's parts where there's like even dramatic like parts and languages just because these people moved from all of these different places there, and that's not including like talk about the people of the Caribbean. You're talking about when you meet Jamaicans, people from St. Thomas, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Haitians, all these different things. It's just one of those like thing with language. We got to be careful in how we put those things out. And so like, and I also want to bring this up when it comes to that because I come from a place where like, kind of what Jay said, everything you said, you did it, and you ain't say it if you ain't mean it, right? And it's because like for me, that's a big thing for me. And I tell anybody that like, yo, don't tell me something because I'm gonna tell, like if you don't tell me something if you don't mean it, because I'm the type of person that if you tell me, I'm gonna take it to heart. So be careful. So it's just like, and then the reason why that is that you like, well, because you're coming from certain places, your word is all you got. That's it. So you say what you need to say and you're gonna stand by and you're gonna see it through. But then not only when you talk about the way kids are raised, you talk about the way adults raise, these words that you hear and you digest, you hold on to them. And that's just having a conversation. So even me personally, when it comes to even the way I communicate with anyone else, is like I try not to speak out of anger. And that kind of goes back to what I spoke about earlier, is that normally when I stand in front of someone, I do not take anything personal, right? I'm for the majority of the part, like my feelings are off to the side. Like I'm just listening to what they're talking to me about. And it typically is weird because like most people, when they think about it, when they hear me say this, is that it typically takes me a day or two before I fully digest like something that someone said and it was supposed to be like a personal thing. But also I like that I like that about myself, because at the same time it's like it really is like what Deion Sanders said, is that your perception of me is not the perception of that I have of myself. So what does it matter? So when I'm standing in front of you, I already know I'm great. I'm gonna do my thing regardless. That's just how I personally feel. So like when we had those things, but I also understand that like when you have an like say example in an intimate relationship, you got to be careful like of saying like, you know, the worst things when you're angry, because an apology can't fix those things. It's just kind of the same thing like when people say like, yo, I get the point that they were trying to make to a certain degree when they say like, you know, what is it, you know, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. But as you mature through your life, you realize like words is actually the thing that actually hurts you the most. And people hold on to that. It's the same thing. You can see it in a child when a parent gives them all their biases or their biases, and they don't really take the opportunity and chances in life just because the people that were around them was telling them to be so fearful. And that's what leads to like things like racism and all of these other isms in the world, is because these things are taught to people. They're not just, you just don't just get them out of randomly, you know what I'm saying? So people, you learn these things, and these are things that people talk to you. And I say this like because it can be on a good side, because even a story that I know from one of my barbers, shout out to my man Chris from Long Island, was my barber for a while, and he told me like a story about his dad, like, you know, they're Italian, but you know kind of how relationships, if you're black, you know, kind of know how that was. But like he said, his dad like eventually went to like New Orleans or whatever, and he said that, you know, he had a certain perception based on like, you know, the environment that he came from. And he was like, you know, his dad wasn't doing as, you know, as great, based, if I remember the story correctly, you know, wasn't doing that great at the time, but he ended up meeting, you know, his neighbors and the people that was in one of the guys in the building that was a black guy, and they ended up developing a great relationship and connection, and it changed his perception on people, right? And that's another thing, like even a deeper, something that's even deeper, but just understanding that people and human beings are human beings, right? And so your DNA is basically a code, right? That's your codex. Like, you didn't choose necessarily to be the person that you chose to be. Like, you came into the world with that already there. So you learn as you grow through life that, like, okay, this is who I am. So if I have some flaws, let me figure out how I can shift and try to improve those flaws. But those flaws and those things don't go away. That's why it's so funny, because people say like, oh, like they understand it from the outside. It's just like, oh yeah, you just like your dad. That's why, like, you can never forget that, like, at the end of the day, humans are still mammals. The same way that you can breed like a dog or whatever, and those traits come through, is the same way you can do with humans. And if you ever follow the context of slavery, that's why they bred the biggest slave with the strongest woman, and you get a strong child. It's because of that same context. We've always known that. So it's not like something that's, oh, what I'm saying is just like, oh my God, it's so controversial or anything. It's facts of the game. And so it's like those same ideologies and those same thoughts get passed down lineage wise. Those same struggles get passed down lineage wise, you know. And then we can talk about the even those ideologies and those words that people have said like many years ago can linger through a people. And you could talk about, you know, self-hate and all these different things, and this is because of the things that were told to them and said to them, and then along the way people kept reinforcing it. And I just want to put that out there. Like, I don't, like, just when you meet with someone or you interacting with someone, understanding that you need to know what these words mean. And in this day and age, in 2025 and moving forward, listen, you got a smartphone, right? in your smartphone, you can literally highlight a word and actually look it up. When you're reading something, don't just skip over the word. Actually Google it and learn what that words actually mean. There's nothing wrong with being able to question things or not understanding everything. Nobody knows it all. And I'll tell you like this, for me, one of my favorite words, and I remember when I learned the word, it was literally in the 4th grade. And it was one of our words of the day, quote unquote, and it was nincompoop. And as a kid, it just made me laugh. It's nincompoop. But then as I got older, that same words, things like unequivocally. I love that word. And it was actually because I saw Will Smith using it in the movie. And he got so upset. He was like, he said, I didn't do this unequivocally. And so as for me, you look it up and you oh, that's a hell of a word to use in a conversation. You know what I mean? Axiomatic, things like that. And it's that's basically what that means is self-evident, right? It's things like that. And this is kind of the context that I'm giving, is that all of these words that I just said, it's another way you can say nincompoop, like dumb, oxymonic, right? It's self-evident. You can say it. Most people be like, well, why you just didn't say self-evident? You know what I mean? But that's the reason why you talk about the level of the nuance that the English language has, right? And I say that again to even go into politics, right? We talk about geopolitics. Geopolitics is hard to understand, right? But just to make things a lot easier for people to understand, really, right, is that people talk about, let's say, one of the biggest things that we got going on right now is the U.S. and what's going on in Europe. To talk about Ukraine, we ain't even gonna get into Israel and Palestine. That's a whole nother thing. We'll talk about that another day. But when you talk to people, you get them your word. People hold that to you. And regardless if there's different languages or culture bounds, once we understand what these words mean, we hold that to you, right? And just to give you a small history lesson, right? They'll tell you all of this stuff on the media and all these other things, right? But people, we forget what the world was like before World War II, particularly in the United States. We were an isolated state, right? And so these are things that you can look up, factually look it up, right? It was FDR, they did certain things. They were blowing up U-boats and blowing up civilian boats and things of that nature. And the Germans literally told the United States, hey, stop sending stuff over here. Stop sending supplies and stuff over here via these boats, hey, because you helping these guys out. We're not trying to deal with you guys, but hey, go ahead, go about your business, but stop sending it on stop sending their supplies on these civilian boats, so they end up blowing that up. So that was one thing that got the citizens of the United States upset. But most of the citizens at the time didn't know that we were doing that, right? And it was the same thing, just like FDR. They knew that Pearl Harbor was going to happen, but they let it happen so we could join the war, because Congress did not want to participate in World War II. So eventually we got in. And this is what you also say, when we talk about context, how context matters, and you see that relationship now, even with the how things got kind of weird, is that the United States came in, but people forget, or they don't really want to acknowledge, that there were 30 million Russian lives that were lost during World War II. The Russians did some crazy things, and as a group of people, they rebuilt cities, shifting them further in line, inland. Well, further is not it's waterbound, but further inbound, just to make sure, right? To make sure that the people were safe, and did all those different things. Then they also, not only did they fight off Napoleon 100 some years before, but then they also kept that German war machine out, and basically destroyed Hitler so many times, right? The only president in the United States that ever acknowledged the sacrifice of the Russian people was JFK, and he had a speech at American University where he actually acknowledged that, right? But the reason why I bring that up and try to give you that context, right, is that after World War II is completed, basically Europe is, it's war torn at this point, right? And so what the United States did, because it was in a better standing and we made so much money doing war and with manufacturing and all of those different things, that's why they say that war is good business, but not really anymore, because of the fact that like nobody is really manufacturing all of these things typically in-house. We don't have these big machine factories and things of that nature, or we building airports just to take off planes, and then later they turn into the private sector airports now. You know, it's not like that anymore, right? And so like what our agreement was with Europe was that, hey, you guys do what you need to do. We'll make sure that we build our military up. We'll hold you down. Make sure that you get yourselves together. That's always been our agreement. So then also that's how they came together to form the EU. Because if people forget that if you go back over basically almost 1,000 years or so, like Europe has always fought. Like they're just basically a bunch of different tribes in these small states. So you talk about the Franks, those Germanic tribes, you talk about like the English, all of these different people. So they fought consistently. So eventually after the EU, they came together and had an agreement that, hey, we're going to take care of each other, look out for each other, to basically to prevent a second war, or like another war like this happen, which would be like a World War III in theory, or for us just to keep fighting. Like it's just not good business for us, because we all just want to live and we're so close to each other, right? And so the United States did that, and that's also how you get NATO. NATO is one of those things that's supposed to be a preventative measure that we agree that we're going to participate in, because we're like going to build these large armies and do all of that, and let you know that the United States has 750 military bases throughout the world. Like these types of things was our agreement to the rest of the world, that we would do these things, right? And if economically, you know, you got to draw back, because granted, every empire comes to rises and it falls. But what you don't do is that give somebody your word and then walk away. Because at the same time, when it was good business for us, say like after 9/11, we were the only country that actually enacted the Article 5 of the NATO agreement, right? And that's basically what that means for those that don't know, is that an attack on one country is an attack on all of us, right? So all of these countries put their countrymen in line to go help us fight a war in Afghanistan after 9/11, right? And we also know that there were no weapons of mass destruction. We also know that people had trained, like the United States had trained Osama bin Laden, like we do all the time. And that also goes back to our interference in Venezuela and all of those different things with the deportations. But I say all of that to get to the point that we gave people our words that we would do things, and they held up their agreement. Now when they need us, we're not there necessarily to hold up our part. And I would say, like in any point in time in any life, in your version of your life, I imagine you, like people being like, okay, cool, you told me to go do this, I went and did these different things, I went about our business. Also pause in that thought, pause at that moment too, because also if you do not realize that the reason why Europe is what you would consider a social democracy is because the reason why they've been able to flourish as well is that they slowed down on military spending and was able to put these things in there, which the United States, because we were the wealthiest country at some point right now, which is kind of questionable right now with China. You can go look at the GDPs of the world, and that'll answer your question when it comes to that. But that's why they have that way, and they focus was like, we're going to do the things that when it comes to our people. And if you do not know, respect the French. The French will they will revolt for whatever reason. I respect the French just for that, because after they saw what America did with the American Revolution, the French Revolution was nuts historically. It's crazy, but they like, listen, I was there for their for their president, their prime minister election. Yo, listen, they was threatening to defecate in their rivers. It was wild. And like, it's a whole thing. But you got to respect it. But going back to it is that when we come to these different things, like, just imagine yourself being someone that you standing with someone and they told you something, and you like, okay, cool, I'm gonna go do what you asked me to do, and I'm gonna go do those things. And then it's like, well, when you needed me during while I'm going to go do what you told me to do, you needed me, and so I went and came and helped you, did all these different things, got a couple bumps and bruises, got cut a bunch of different times, and I got scars from that. And then, now you go back away, and then now one of you, like, say, like now my cousin, which is their, like, basically a friend of their, it's not only your cousin, but it's their good friend. And they like, hey, we need your help to go do some things. And you like, yo, I need you to come help my cousin. And it's like, come with me to go help my cousin out. And they like, nah, I don't want to. And it's like, but my cousin when it helped you when we was going through it, when you was going through your thing, and he got cuts and bruises too, just like I did. You know what I mean? Like, what we gonna do about this? Oh, nah, it's not my problem. And that's why I say, like, even when you say what your word mean a lot when you tell somebody something. And so I just wanted to take the time really to kind of like look at how heavy that can be at times, because like you see it so many times that like people say things, and we not even talk about it just like in politics, but just in media. Like, you know, like it's like my background, like I learned a lot about media when it comes to like music business, and you talk about all these like the news is set up and it was designed to be sensationalized. That's why you don't see many good stories on the news anymore. And even that's most of our lifetime. But there was a time like in our life where you only knew the local news around you, and the way that they portray things with their words and the way they structure it gives you a perception that where you live at is not even safe. Yeah, things may kind of go up and down depending on more or less like what's happening in the economy or the local economy, right? But I want to be very clear to the people that are listening. Listen to my words. The world is safer now than it's ever been. If you were a person that remember, like, say, grew up in the 90s, the 80s, say somewhere like New York, Rochester, New York, Camden, New Jersey, like parts of Atlanta, New Orleans, before like Katrina, you still talk about Compton, you talk about Oakland, California, Chicago, all these places. If you were old enough to remember what it was like for us to be kids to try to go back and forth to school, that world is not the world we live in now. And people take it for granted, but it's because of the way things are being sensationalized. And I mean, like, yeah, things still happen. What do you expect? It's like me saying, like, oh, I live in the tri-state area. Yeah, it's 10 million people here. And there's 10 million people in this area. Like, what? Like, if there not being crime, it's not going to be a thing. It's more than likely not going to be a real thing. And of course, I understand that statistically and probability-wise, it's more likely that things are going to happen here than me living out in the country. But I want to make this clear as well too, is the reason why we moved into cities was just not for economic reasons. Because what you realize is that if you're really being honest with yourself, is we're much safer when we're together than when we're by ourselves, right? Because I had to explain to people, like, they were like, well, why do Americans have so many guns? Like, people always use like the Second Amendment, but I also want to say this, and I'm gonna say this directly. A lot of people are pussy anyway, right? And I say bad pussy, no disrespect, because, you know, there's some good out there, but like bad pussy, right? And I say that, and with that, to emphasize that, because the Second Amendment was our right to rage against the government, to make sure that we had the weapons to rise up against a tyrannical government, right? But a lot of the reasons why we still have guns, as I explained to my friends, is that living in, say, like, if you come to visit, like, what's considered the mega metropolis, which is the Eastern Seaboard, it's almost hard to go like 200 miles without like going from like basically like Maine all the way down to Florida. It's hard to go basically about 250 miles without running into another city, right? Actual substantial, what you would call a real city. But that's only one part, and the California coastline is kind of like that as well. But when you look at it, it's like, if you live out in Michigan, places like Michigan, North Dakota, South Dakota, the Iowas, parts of like, say, like Arizona, Nebraska, Kansas, the middle part of our country, like, those people live basically by themselves. So, you know, say somewhere like Colorado, like I lived in Denver for a few years, right? The bears are in your backyard. You know what I'm saying? So imagine years ago and even today, like, what are you going to do to take care of you and your family and to hold it down when like a bear or a cougar like shows up, or you're walking on the trail going for a walk? What are you going to do at that point? And it's like, we have animals here in the United States that other countries don't realize because they don't live here, because like, we have a unique perspective here. Like, we have Great Lakes, like a country is surrounded by two large bodies of ocean, the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. You know what I'm saying? We have, like, if things really, really got really, really bad, and we had to get away from being a global society, which wouldn't make any sense logically at all to get stopped, because we're too ingratiated with each other. The world is too connected than it's ever been before, right? But say if it did happen, we have everything that we realistically need right here in this nation, right? But the way that the world, the way that we portray these things, and the way social media portrays it, the way the news portrays things, it's hard to understand what is actually happening versus the quote unquote the BS that's going on in the world, right? It's just, it can kind of get infuriating, just to kind of, like, for someone, for me, that's well read and that's astute, that I'm looking and seeing this, and it's like people to this day don't understand that, like, yo, like, the stuff that you see on Instagram, the stuff that you see on Twitter, like, it's bots on Twitter, right? Like, people on, like, it's interesting, because if you went to go buy some sneakers, I remember, like, when you go buy sneakers, people are like, oh, it's bots buying all the sneakers. Yeah, so if they can automatically go and buy those sneakers, you don't think that there's bots out there? Like, people have been found out, even with the advent of ChatGPT, that people are farming ChatGPT to send out messages, and they didn't have enough tokens. And it's like, pay attention to that, right? Why is it that, like, we talk about these things and we talk about more of the anomaly than we talk about what is there? And I understand it, right? And for those that don't know, like, statistics is one of the last math that human beings kind of discovered when it comes to math. So it's hard for our brains really to understand statistics, right? Like, you, in the context, 10% of something can really be a lot, but people don't understand it, right? And it's like, when people say, like, oh, you, like, you know, out of 100, what is majority of the population? They think that it's 50, like 51%. No, it's technically based on statistics. It's kind of more along the lines of 49%, right? That's a large amount. And so people, like, don't really understand how that particularly works. And I know it sounds kind of crazy, but when you break it down and you do the variable statistics into it, that's the reason why the 49% is there. But if you want to keep it simplistic, yeah, you can do, like, well, to be majority, it needs to be 41%. But that's why it gets so complicated, right? But I just want to put that out there, that understanding what these words mean. And it's the kind of same thing, like, when and I love the bar, because I got who he was talking to at the time, but it was like Jay-Z when he said men and women lie but numbers don't. And that's kind of like one of those things. But even in the context of what we're talking about, what words mean, is that it's still a human being, so they can put these numbers out there, and those numbers can be screwed to a certain extent, right? And I'll say this as well, is that, like, black men are still portrayed like a particular type of way in the media and all these different things. But, you know, and I say this to, like, you know, to the community as well, like, especially to the young men, like, you know, applause to yourself, like, give yourself a round of applause, man. Like, we're like statistically proven to be the most active fathers in our kids' lives. We're active. We've been statistically proven to be the most active, actively and engaged husbands in a relationship as well. So that means we help out in the house. We help the women that we're dating or we're married to, the most in comparison to other races of people as well. So it's so many things that we're going, but, like, the way people say things, and the way they try to put that little spin on it, changes that perspective on it. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, what you want to do is sit there, really, a lot of times, is listen to someone. And this is the biggest thing that I can try to give to anyone when it comes to this, right? And is that you realize that, like, if you sit in a room and just listen, right, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right? If you know something and you studied it and you know it, you can sit in a room and don't have to say anything, and you can know who doesn't know anything. That you can look at them and be like, I know you don't know, right? Because you know it, right? You can't question someone that knows what's going on, right? Because you know it definitively, right? Doesn't mean that you don't go without error, but when you mastering your craft, and you can sit in there and be quiet and be like, yeah, I know you don't know what you're talking about. That doesn't make sense. Okay, cool, right? And I say it's kind of the same idea that, like, doesn't matter if they're CEO of a company. It's been statistically proven again. 60% of CEOs are digitally illiterate. They're not great with technology. In 2025, these are the people that are running the world and doing all these things, and they can barely use a computer. You see what I'm saying? They want you to do all of these different things because they can't do it themselves. But that's why I'm also challenging you, is that you don't allow yourself to become that way. That's why I wanted to start this podcast, really to challenge people to really think about the things that they're hearing, the things that they're seeing, and question those things, right? It's the same thing like when you have conversations with, say, a friend that's like, I live in New York, or a friend that may live somewhere. But just giving examples, like, because I live in New York, like, yeah, it's incredibly expensive here, right? But there's also great benefits here. What people fail to realize is that just like California, we have we have SUNY and CUNY schools. So like, instead of sending your kids away, if you're a state resident in New York, you can actually send your kid to a school in the state of New York, and it'll be a lot more affordable than sending them away. And especially if you live in the city of New York with a CUNY school, you can send them to city schools, and it's a lot cheaper as well, right? But then say if you move somewhere else, it's like, yeah, cool, I gotta run away, I'm gonna go somewhere else. And I don't want to say run away, because let me take that back. Again, we talk about words, but they make the decision that is best for them to move, right? But the thing is that sometimes when they say this and they talking to you, I always ask, like, hey, when you moving away, what are your reasons for moving away, right? Because just because you move away doesn't mean you're going to escape the problems that you were facing in the city that you were in, right? Because if you don't have certain skill sets, or your job is not in demand wherever you plan on moving to, you might run into the same exact problem, right? Because ideally you thinking like, well, I'm in New York, so I'm paying so much. But say like if you move to, say, like Tallahassee, Florida, right? There's no knock on Tallahassee, right? But we do know that they pay a little less. But say your job is not necessarily in demand then, or they don't pay as much, so your income drops. But then the rent is what it's going to be, and so you can literally leave your place. You can literally leave somewhere to go somewhere to have the same exact problem somewhere else, right? And the easiest thing, and I say those people that are considering moving and all of those types of things, you have to just take the time. I would say, as a person that's moved and lived all over this country, and I want to make that clear so you understand, for me, that I've lived in all over this country, got people everywhere, right? So like when you move it somewhere, you should look and see who the number one employer is there, right? So if you go to Alabama, the number one employer is the University of Alabama. So the question is that they employ, how many people do they employ? Where are the jobs at? You have to ask yourself these questions. That information is written down, and you can understand what that means. What's the GDP of that country, of that state? What's the education like in that state? All of these different things you can factor in if you're going, if you got kids in those things, because you could leave a place and have the same exact problems, and then you wonder, like, and that, I want to say they're wondering, but then you're the person that's sitting in the place where you are, and you're like, oh, this person moved away, year or two later they moved back. You know what I mean? Like, granted, some things might have happened, but a lot of times you basically exchange the same problem that you had in that one place for another place. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't leave, because there's a quote that I remember is that this gentleman, I can't remember exactly who's the quote's from, but it was like, the synopsis of it is that, paraphrasing it, I should say, the paraphrasing is basically like, if you die where you were born, the question you have to ask is, did you really live? And you think about it and you're like, there's so many beautiful places on this planet, right? It's like, is the place where you were born at, was that the best place for you? You know what I'm saying? Was it? And sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Circumstances allow it for whatever. But yeah, I think that's the case. Is we talked about a lot of different things, and I wanted to put that out there and just kind of like say, like, give each other some grace, when it comes to words. Also, too, make sure that when you say something, you actually really mean what you said, right? So take the time to think about what you're going to say before you actually say it, because once it's out in the world, you can't take it back, right? And I just say, just be careful with that. And it's that, because words have a meaning and words have power, right? They really do have power. Like, you can literally put, like, I don't want to say like a curse on someone, but you can definitely say something to someone and they hold that. And also be careful about it as well, because you never know what the next person is actually going through, and you were that one person that pushed them over the edge. Like, you know, what is it? FAFO, fuck around and find out. And you'll be the person to fuck around and find out. Just because you didn't want to take the time just to be like, okay, let me chill for a second. Let me take a moment before I say what I'm going to say or whatever's going on. Just because you were having a bad day, they might not even been attacking on them. You know what I'm saying? And I say, like, at the end of the day, like, we talked about all of these different topics from a lot of different perspectives, but it's a couple words that I really want you to think about, right? What is respect to you? What does respect mean to you? What does freedom mean to you? And another one is, what does love mean to you? Those three right there is something that I want to leave with you just to think about, you know. And then also, you know, we're gonna wrap this up, you know, get up out of here. But at the same time, I want to say thank you for just listening, you know, hearing it. You know, as usual, always feel free to give me your thoughts. Send them over to sessionsandthought@gmail.com. You can hit us up on the podcast. Well, not on the podcast, but you can always hit us up on our social media sites. We basically on everything, you know. So like, yeah, we're literally on everything anyway. But I just want to leave you with this, and particularly the questions, and hear back what you got to say. You know, is, have words ever failed you? And have words ever saved you? I want to hear the good stories and the bad stories. Because, like, listen, you know, sometimes you can talk yourself out of a situation, and then sometimes you can talk yourself out of a situation. But, yo, I want to say thank you for tuning in. Yo, and just go ahead and throw on that wonderful outro we got out here. We out of here. Love.
Alright, so just like that, another session comes to a close. That was the podcast I was talking about. They just deep dive and have real conversation about everything. But trust me, the thinking doesn't stop there. I definitely think this episode was a hit. Let's keep the conversation going online, guys. So follow at The Sit Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Blue Sky. If you've got something in your mind, just drop us a line. Email us at sessionsandthought@gmail.com because Izzy definitely wants to hear it. But until next time, guys, keep questioning, keep growing, and remember, thinking should be like breathing.
All right, cut and print. Beautiful, guys.